Okay, so apologies there for the interruption. So what I was saying was that it's difficult for people when they're beginning to paint to perceive the tone of the objects in front of them, the tone being the relative darkness or lightness of objects in relation to one another. It has nothing to do with colour. So when you're looking at colour, at coloured objects, it's very difficult at the beginning for your brain to differentiate between observing what colour something is and what tone something is. So a simple tool that I always advise people to use, and it'll really stand you to try this, is to just close your eyes almost to the point, as you're looking at the objects, close your eyes almost to the point where you can't see the objects anymore. So just before the point where you lose sight of the objects that are in front of you. And then you'll be able to see, so I want you to try and do that now, if possible, to a group of objects that are in the room with you. And just observe that this does two things. Number one, you can't see as many details as you had previously. And number two, what it does is as you look through your eyelashes, it filters out the colour but leaves the tone, and it's much easier to see how relatively dark or light these objects are in relation to one another if the colour is sort of drained out of them and the tones are much more obvious. So there we are, less detail and more obvious general areas of tone in relation to one another. Okay, so I'm going to start painting. We're going to take the middle tone first. So I've decided to go with a blue. And the reason that I've decided to go with a blue is because of the temperature of that colour. Colour temperature is defined really as a perceptible sensation of temperature as we look at one colour or another. So if we were to walk into a blue room, for example, that would be perceptibly colder than a room that was yellow. And the warmest colour is yellow, and the coolest colour is purple. So there's a kind of a cool side of the colour wheel and there's a warm side of the colour wheel. Yellow being the warmest and purple being the coolest. And so what we want to do with the underpainting is we want to complement what the temperature of the actual painting. So as we're looking at the objects in front of us here, most of them are warm colours. So we have reds, we have yellows, we have kind of a light orange on the butternut squash, and then we have a kind of a brown colour on the pot here, which is actually, brown is just dark orange basically. You know, I often joke that I don't really believe in the colour brown, that it's just a dark orange. And the only cool colour here is the blue teapot. So we're going to, if we're going to paint a mostly warm composition, what we want to do is go with a cool colour on the underneath. And that's because what will happen is you'll be able to see some of the cool colour come up through the painting if it's in the underpainting, and it'll reverberate, or it'll vibrate against the warmer colours in the upper painting, creating more spectacular colour in effect. Okay, so I'm going to start with this middle blue here. This is just blue, my normal blue, and I'm going to treat this as my middle tone. So I'm looking at the objects in front of me, and I want to choose some areas that will be middle toned. Well, I'm looking at the shadows, and I'm thinking that the shadows and the side of the pot here are the darkest tone, and I'm thinking that the highlight on the side of the butternut squash, the highlights on the teapot, they would be kind of the lightest tone, as well as the white sheet underneath. So the middle tone would be the shade on the side of the butternut squash, the shade on the side of the apples, the shade on the side of the teapot. So I'm going to fill in those areas first. I'm just going to very, not too preciously, just brush in those areas. The reason that you don't have to be too precious is because this is the underpainting, and really, as I said, it's just a plan of the tones. So if there's any corrections to be made afterwards, you can do those in the actual painting, which will go down on top of the underpainting. So I'm just painting in the tones at the sides of the apples. You'll notice that this shadow on the side of this apple is darker than the shade on the side of the other two apples, probably because of the colour of that apple. But I am not going to categorize it as a dark, as in the dark blue that I'm going to use for the shadows underneath the apples. I'm not going to categorize this shade on the side of the apple as dark as that, because I have to choose whether it's going to fall into the darker category or the lighter category, and I'm choosing to put it into the middle category. I don't think it's dark enough to go into the dark category. I'm just going to continue along. Put in all the shades on the sides of the objects. And then I'm also going to put in the shade on the teapot. Now, in order to see the shape of the area that we want to paint with the shade, again, you may want to squint in order to see that more clearly. So as I'm squinting and looking at that, I can kind of see an area that looks like this. I'm going to use the pencil to define it. I'm going to come back in with the pencil and just draw a sort of interior shape inside what I've seen the shape of the teapot to be already. I'm just drawing some outlines so that I can easily fill in an area with the middle tone of blue. It's really as simple as this. Now, the underneath of the teapot, this area here, I'm judging to be slightly darker, so I'm actually going to leave that, and I'm not going to fill it in with the middle shade. I'm going to put that into the category of a dark tone. And you may need to use a finer brush in places. I mean, you should not be precious, but don't be, reckless, so to speak, with filling in these tones. So you want to get some accuracy to what you're doing. Okay, so that's all the middle tones, as I can see for the moment on the teapot. Okay, I'm going to go back to my other brush. I'm going to fill in the shade on the side of the butternut squash. Very simply done. And where else do we have this middle shade? Okay, I'm looking around and I don't see any obvious examples of it at the moment. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to mix up some colour to use as the darkest shade, to use as the darkest tone. So if you pull up a colour wheel on Google Images, you will see, I'll just talk about this while I'm mixing up the colour here, you will see that on the colour wheel there are certain colours that face each other across the colour wheel. So across from blue is orange. And if you want to darken any colour on the colour wheel, you mix in a little bit or a lot of the colour that's facing that colour across the colour wheel. So we call that colour its complementary colour. So the complement of blue, if you look at your colour wheel, is orange. And in order to make a dark blue, I'm going to use a dark orange. Now to make a dark orange, as I've already said, brown is just dark orange. So I'm going to use a bit of black in this orange to darken it down so that it becomes a kind of a brown colour. Always add black very sparingly. I always use the analogy of cooking at this point. When you're adding salt to cooking, you add a little bit of salt and then you taste what you've made, and then if you need more salt, then you add a little bit more, but you never throw all of the salt into what you're cooking and then taste it, because there's no way that you can take the salt back out of what you're cooking. So black is kind of like that. What you want to do is you want to add a little bit of black, see if the colour is dark enough, then add a little bit more. And you can go too far with black. What black tends to do is it tends to suck the vibrancy of the colour out of the colour that you've mixed the black into. So you don't want to add too much black. It'll go dark very, very quickly and will lose its vibrancy. Now I've kind of gotten a good brown there. So now what I want to do is I want to take some of the blue and I want to mix that brown through some blue to make a dark blue. So I'm going to take some of the blue over here. I'll make a separate cool for that. And I'm going to take some of this brown and just bring it over there. And you'll notice then that it stays blue, but it becomes just a darker shade of blue. If you mix complementary colours together in equal amounts, you'll end up with a neutral grey in the middle between the two of them. And that neutral grey is located at the centre of the colour wheel. So you don't really want a neutral grey. If it becomes a really neutral grey, now this is nice because this is kind of like a petrol blue. It's not quite grey. It's still on the side of blue. So I'm going to use that as my dark tone. And I'm going to paint it in here to the shadow underneath the butternut squash, just to test it and see how dark it is in comparison to the previous tone that I put in. And that's just a nice contrast now with that middle blue. So there's the shade underneath the butternut squash. I'm just going to do one more here underneath the apple, and I'm constantly, as I'm painting, I'm constantly referring back to what's in front of me. It's not like you forget about what you're painting.